Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. Let's deal with chaos theory. Uh, Chaos theory is a theory in science which I'll often hear atheists refer to in trying to refute the existence of God. So, even though it's a scientific theory, it has implications in terms of theology. And it's important to discuss it and understand its implications and how it, in fact, does not disprove the existence of God. But it's also in itself an interesting scientific theory. Uh, Chaos theory um, refers to chaos meaning a very randomized system, physical system, that seems to be utterly unpredictable. And what the theory essentially says is that in certain highly complex physical systems, their behavior can be unpredictable in a sort of deterministic classical sense. That despite the fact that you can know the rules of the system and how the system and its components behave, nevertheless, it produces surprises. The chaos itself creates um, random surprises and results in these complicated systems that you wouldn't otherwise predict. Um, for example, the theory of chaos, father of chaos theory, is an individual named Edward Lorenz, who was an MIT meteorologist. And back in the 60s, he realized that small differences in a dynamic system, like the weather, uh, could trigger vast and often unsuspected results. Um, he wrote a paper, famous paper, in 1972 called Predictability: Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? And this paper resulted in the phrase that you've probably heard before, the butterfly effect. Butterfly. So the idea is, could the flapping of the wings of a butterfly in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? Can such a seemingly minor change in a complicated, chaotic system like the atmosphere have an unpredictable result of creating a huge air disturbance like a tornado thousands of miles away in the state of Texas? So this is known as the butterfly effect. It's a hallmark of chaos theory. Little things can have unpredictable, huge changes in the system over time. And again, the whole point of randomness theory is to emphasize, or not, I'm sorry, chaos theory is to emphasize randomness. The idea of the universe ultimately is random. Random and unpredictable. So this is how the atheist uses chaos theory against arguments in favor of the existence of God. And the argument is pretty simple. It's, well, the universe itself is a highly complicated um, uh, system similar to like the weather. And despite the fact that we have these laws of physics and that we can predict the behavior of energy and matter and all those sorts of different physical aspects, that nonetheless it can create these big effects that are surprising but also very unpredictable. And one of the big surprising effects that they would argue is life itself, the existence of life, the existence of human beings being an unpredictable result of the laws of physics in a complicated universe that results in a big effect, human beings. So uh, the atheist argues, well, I mean, if you have a chaotic universe that creates random events that are unpredictable, then it wasn't God who decided to create human beings. It was an unpredictable, chaotic universe. No God needed. Uh, and that's why I like this theory. That's why the atheists like this theory. Well, this theory really is an attack on intelligent design. Intelligent design, or ID. That's basically a branch of theological arguments for the existence of God that says that there must be a God in order for these complicated things to exist. God must have designed them. So, for instance, they may point to the human eye and say that it's impossible that a human eye could be designed randomly through evolution. It must have had a divine designer to be able to do it. It's statistically impossible that random um, randomness through evolution could create such a complicated organ. Uh, Intelligent design is a whole branch of arguments for the existence of God. Another one would be the fine-tuned universe theory, that the universe and its certain cosmological constants are perfectly set to allow for life to arise. And the atheist would say, no, 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 chaos theory. You can get you can get highly organized, unpredictable results through chaos theory in a universe and randomness that could create something like a human eye. Now, I generally don't argue intelligent design. Um, I argue the cosmological arguments for the existence of God. So this really isn't the chaos theory really isn't something that concerns me all that much. Um, but it's an important thing to understand. It's also important to understand that chaos theory doesn't affect the cosmological arguments. That's one of the reasons I really like the cosmological arguments. It's an attack on intelligent design. So, explain a little bit more about what chaos theory is. So, chaos theory basically says that there are these chaotic systems, which in principle are governed by laws that are still deterministic in form, but small uncertainties are amplified so radically that in practice their behavior rapidly becomes unpredictable. Now, uh, I gave you one example of that would be butterfly effect. Another example of chaos theory is Mandelbrot sets. Uh, Bernard Mandelbrot in the 1970s developed this new field of mathematics, and it's known as fractal geometry. And it's called fractal geometry because you're dealing with fractions of dimension. We have our general graph. We have one dimension going this way, another dimension going this way. If you have a three-dimensional graph, you can have a third dimension. Mathematically speaking, you can have as many dimensions really as you want, but you won't be able to imagine that. So fractal dimensions means dimensions in between those dimensions. So instead of in one dimension or two dimensions, it might be 1.5 dimensions. And Mandelbrot basically showed how you could take an equation and take the output from the equation and put it back in the same equation, and take that output and put it back in the equation. You can do this repeatedly, and you can create patterns from that appear to be fractal. Fractal. And what Mandelbrot was trying to do was he's trying to describe very rough edges of things that aren't easily understood in ordinary geometry, so he had to come up with fractal geometry. So, for instance, you might have something like the coastline. You might have like the coastline of some country, and you have this pattern here, this edge, which is very jagged. And as you zoom into this coastline, you find that this smaller area is also very jagged. So it also has its strange its strange shape, right? And you could take that and zoom in even closer, right? You take a smaller portion of that, and you discover that also has its own jaggedness. So mathematically speaking, you could zoom in infinitely, and you would end up with these patterns of jaggedness, and they seem to be infinitely smaller and smaller, and they don't disappear, at least in mathematical terms. But they're different. They're different from one another. There's a pattern to them that's different than the pre-existing patterns. And this is what he calls fractal geometry. So the idea is this isn't strictly one-dimensional or two-dimensional. It lies between one and two dimensions because it's not a straight line at any point. The closer and closer you get to it, you see it's still got these jagged details to it. So that's the general notion of fractal geometry. Um, Fractals are created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. So what Mandelbrot did is he took a simple equation, calculated the results, took the results, put it back in the equation, got new results, took those results, put them back in the equation, got new results, and then he would plot these results out on a graph or something, and you would get these designs very similar to something like a coastline, which were fractal, because it's mathematics, it's infinite. So the more reiterations of the same output that you did, you got further and further detailed, seemingly infinite patterns on smaller and smaller scales that, ironically, resemble a lot of things that we see in nature, like coastlines or maybe tree branches, things with this seemingly fractal-like design to them. So that's another example of chaos theory, but it's in terms of geometry. And the point is that you could take a system and you know what the equation is that you're using and that you're repeating over and over again in a feedback loop. So it's deterministic in that sense. But when you plot it out, it results in these seemingly random details, even in an infinite smaller scale. And it's unpredictable exactly what these details will be. The more you grow them, the closer you look, the more surprises you see. So the idea is that even in a very deterministic system like an equation, if you repeat it enough times, it can surprise you. It can seem unpredictable or random in terms of what the results are. So, again, this is an idea of randomness and unpredictability in a seemingly deterministic system. Um, Now, as chaos theory relates to God, God has infinite knowledge. We call this omniscience. That's a basic characteristic of God. So, while a human being can't predict certain highly complex systems with these unpredictable features, these chaotic features, that doesn't mean God can't, because God has infinite knowledge. Even if you have something like a Mandelbrot set, geometrically speaking, that can be reiterated an infinite number of times and create an infinite number of patterns, some of which are unpredictable. God has infinite knowledge, so God can handle that. There's nothing unpredictable about that to God. Now, that's a mystery how one could have infinite knowledge, but God is uncaused, and God is a mystery, and God does have infinite knowledge. God has to have infinite knowledge to be able to decide what of the infinite possibilities for material reality become real or actualized. So, even though these chaotic systems produce unpredictable results for human, that doesn't mean they're unpredictable for God. In fact, they're not. God knows them all, because God has infinite knowledge. Uh, Chaos theory is really an attack against intelligent design. Uh, Now, it doesn't prove God isn't omniscient. uh, However, uh, chaos theory doesn't affect the cosmological arguments. So, frankly, chaos theory doesn't worry me in the least bit. Intelligent design, people who believe in intelligent design, yeah, chaos theory can cause you problems in terms of your arguments for the existence of God. But my arguments are the cosmological arguments, which are the better arguments, and the unbeatable arguments. And that's why I do videos on them and tell them to you. So, in terms of the cosmological arguments, chaos theory uh, is irrelevant. It doesn't disprove any of the cosmological arguments. Um, the idea that the universe could have unpredictable and surprising results over time, or could even produce organized beings like human beings out of randomness and chaos, doesn't affect the cosmological arguments at all, because the cosmological arguments are based on the existence of the universe in the first place. So, what happens in the universe and the results that occur don't have anything to say, really, about why the universe is there in the first place. So, it's not a big deal. For example, I've done videos on the beginningless time paradox, and I've shown why time has to have a beginning, an ultimate beginning. And because of that, uh, there has to be some uncaused metaphysical cause for the existence of reality, material reality, and time. There has to be an uncaused metaphysical cause for time itself. And anything that is capable of causing time cannot itself be subject to time. So anything that is subject to time cannot be the cause of time. So uh, chaos theory involves material systems, and all material systems are subject to time. The universe is subject to time. Um, uh, so when when you think about chaos theory, you should think, well, wait a minute, you're talking about systems that are subject to time, and therefore they can't be the cause of time itself, and therefore chaos theory cannot be an uncaused metaphysical cause. Therefore, doesn't disprove God at all, not in the least bit. You still need a God in order to have a chaotic system for this theory to even work in. So this doesn't explain the existence of material reality. It doesn't explain why this particular material reality is created and not another particular reality, why one exists and not the other. You need an uncaused metaphysical cause called God to make that decision in a very mysterious way. So, chaos theory doesn't affect the cosmological arguments. It doesn't explain what the first. It doesn't explain how there doesn't need to be a first cause or a prime mover. Um, so it doesn't impact the cosmological arguments in the least bit. Uh, just remember, chaos and randomness refer to material physical systems that are all subject to time. So they can't be the cause of time. So they can't be the ultimate reason why material reality exists. They can't be because they're subject to time. You're looking for an answer that is not subject to time. This is all subject to time. Now, a point I've made in other videos is that God is uncaused, and God's power to create is also uncaused. And that uncaused power apparently comes with uh, the required use of certain uncaused materials like atoms and molecules. And that's not God's fault. That's an uncaused um, power that he has. He can't change it. So God is forced to use those materials, which an uncaused power includes. And to the extent that those materials, the materials that the universe is made of, um, demand some sort of randomness or chaos or probability, like quantum mechanics, God is stuck using that, and that's what God has to use in order to create things and to create human beings, and that's his only choice. Now, I obviously don't know every possible material God has at his disposal that are uncaused that he can use to create things, but I'm just saying, with what we know of, it certainly seems reasonable that this is part of the uncaused power to create, and God may very well have to use these materials, these amoral materials, in creation. And so that's the way it's got to be done. Uh, and it's not quite as predictable and deterministic as one might hope for. But when you're dealing with an uncaused power, you got to use what you got. And that's what God has. That's not a knock on God, and that's not a knock on God's power. That's an uncaused power. That's the only power that is. So a lot of this reasoning still doesn't disprove the existence of God. Not at all. So, what I really want you to take from this is when you hear some atheists talk about chaos or randomness, that does not disprove cosmological arguments for the existence of God. So don't think that, oh, they know what they're talking about. There's no God because of this. That's not true. Simply not true. This is more designed for the intelligent design argument and that group of theists who like those arguments. But I prefer the cosmological arguments because they're better. You can't beat them. They're better. All right. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Please press the subscribe button. I'd appreciate it. And I hope you took something away from this. And take care.